Hello, logistics class. I hope you will enjoy this week's topic. It is going to be Chapter 1 in your book, and it's called Chapter 1 Supply Chain Management and Overview. And some of the main learning objectives that you're going to be able to focus on this week is understand the major external change drivers in the global economy, understand the development of supply chain management in leading organizations, and its contribution to financial viability, and then appreciate the significance and role of supply chain management among private, public, and nonprofit organizations. Understand the contributions of a supply chain approach to organizational efficiency and effectiveness for competing successfully in the global marketplace, and then explain the benefits that can be achieved from implementing supply chain best practices, and understand the major challenges and issues that face organizations currently and in the future. So as you read through the chapter, these are the major items that you're supposed to glean from the readings this week. Again, as I said earlier in my introductory video, I do want you to realize that, again, this week is more of a reiteration, a review of what we talked about in Introduction to Supply Chain Management. As we get into week 2 and the further weeks, you will all see that we will be going and getting more of a focused look at how logistics plays a crucial role in the supply chain. Now, things that I'm going to kind of highlight that you'll read throughout the book this week are just some items I'm going to share with you in this short video. This video will be a little less in length than the future ones because, again, we're kind of just reviewing information. But things I want you to keep in mind as you're reading the chapter. First of all, the main thing we need to realize is one of the major drivers in supply chain is the rate of change. We've learned how to calculate the rate of change, but let's talk about the input of the rate of change. Something I want to share with you all right now is the rate of change has accelerated in the United States, okay? And not just in this U.S. in domestic global business, but globally. So we're working with the global marketplace, the global supply chain. I can't give you enough emphasis on that word global. This is the global economy. So years ago, anything that you talked about in business, you were always kind of, local. But now it's global because of our technology, because of all the advances that we're able to reach across the seas, across the lands. Okay, so globally, those are terms that are sprinkled throughout the chapters. You hear me talk about that in class lectures. So keep that mindset of globalization and how that has really changed the face of business in the last 15 to 30 years. Now, something else I wanted to share with you that I had kind of written down is I define globalization. Many believe that globalization has replaced the Cold War of the post-World War II era as a driving force for world economics. And we started seeing that change, I said, in the 1970s. And the U.S. firms found themselves asking these questions. Where in the world should they source their production? Where in the world should they manufacture their items? Where in the world should they market their products? From where in the world should they warehouse and distribute? And then what global transportation strategy should they utilize? So, in other words, instead of that becoming a phrase like what in the world, where in the world, we are now getting into that is actually asking a question, where in the world location are we going to do these functions that we used to do locally? But the money's not really there anymore. The demand is not really there anymore. So you're having to get yourself to go in other directions that normally you wouldn't. You replace them. I like to use placebound because years ago, things were very limited on how far you could go. Only certain folks could go certain areas. And nowadays, you have to go beyond your boundaries. Either if you do that physically or you do it through the telephone line, so to speak, or through the World Wide Web. So that's kind of a cool thing to think about as we see. And that's that rate of change that's driving that. Also, you got to realize there are many different issues or challenges for a global supply chain in this global economy. But your supply is more volatile. Supply and demand becomes more volatile. and there's your life cycles of your products are a little bit shorter, and then the traditional organizational boundaries are blurred. Jobs change, chain of commands change, all because of that global supply chain demand. When you factor in things like natural disasters, well, that can play even a larger role. And when a hurricane hits, wow, typhoon hits, that's also big considerations, because if a typhoon hits in China, it's no longer looking at, oh, that's just China. That affects the United States too, especially when you're exporting goods in and out. And so things that used to just be localized are now felt globally because we're that dependent on each other. You've got to realize that companies maintain their profitability by outsourcing. Outsourcing is a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. Jobs are lost. Productivity goes down. Maybe quality is lost. But sometimes in a crunch time economy, that's when you have to depend on your outsourcing. Is that always the best decision in the long run? Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. So those are some items you need to think about. Also realize that with other considerations of global economy, technology in the supply chain affects that as well. We have talked about that in class. We know the World Wide Web has made a lot of great advancements. Amazon.com is one of the biggest examples of that, as well as other retailers have followed in their steps, like Target and Walmart. But Amazon is still the leader because they thought of it first, unless there was another company that they stole some of their ideas from, or not stole, but borrowed. So those are things to think about. Also, like I said, outsourcing products, again, helps everything kind of stay balanced. But of course, there's always the downsides. There's always something that is, compromised or lost. Something else to think about is consolidation in the organizational sense. Organizational consolidation sort of took place in World War II, after World War II, and manufacturing became the leading driver of supply chains. And when the markets became, more fragmented and competitive, manufacturing firms saw advantage through logistics excellence, like Walmart, Sears, and Kmart. And now these store chains are big players in logistics, as we can see. And the importance of the consolidation and the power shifts that occur from that is that large retailers are accorded special consideration for consumer product companies, and the value-added services that these retailers demand allows them to operate more efficiently and often more effectively. And the consumer is also now a big player in that, because of technology, because we're becoming more educated, we are now more empowered. Now, today's consumers, as my notes said, they're more enlightened. They no longer just take your word for it. They will do their research. For example, I do my research on products to see if I'm getting the best price, to see if I'm getting the best quality, because there are a lot of products out there that are not good quality. Companies outsource, sometimes they get in a pinch and things are compromised. That's not always the case of always, but it does happen. And then you still got the government policy and regulation, and this really started taking place in the late 1980s and 90s, especially in transportation and in communications and financial institutions. My notes that I took this week, I want y'all to be very aware of that governmental policy and regulation impacts businesses and their supply chains. And there's deregulation that has taken place that included transportation, communications, and financial institutions. And that kind of changed the face of how those functions in each of those sectors were taken care of. If you don't understand anything else out of this chapter, remember, you're looking for the supply chain concept. And I want you to realize that the development of a concept started back in the 1960s. And that was the development of the idea of physical distribution, which focus on the outbound side of a firm's logistics systems. And the focus of the physical distribution was on total systems costs, analyzing trade-off scenarios to arrive at the best and lowest system cost. And logistics and integrated logistics management emerged during the 1980s. So that's something that you got to kind of focus on as you study. That really the 80s was when logistics started kind of emerging in their own right. And again, I always refer to supply chain as a sleeping giant because it is the backbone of business, but it got ignored. And I don't see how that was possible, but it was. And the authors of our text and the researchers that contributed to our text, they acknowledge that. They don't come right out and say it. I'll say it for them. But that's pretty much have been the situation. But supply chain management is the efficient and the effective flow of products and materials. We understand that as supply chain professionals. And not only is our products and materials, it's our services, it's our information, and the financials that's involved in that. And therefore, that's why when you go through the training of this program, you get a healthy dose of all those aspects. We understand that finally there's some major supply chain issues. Some I've already talked about a little bit in this lecture. But my trust that you will go through the chapter and read through each section. There's so many different examples, so many different issues and challenges that supply chain professionals and the whole field of supply chain itself is facing. So again, it does go right back to the globalization. So as you go back through this week and look through the learning objectives, please be able to look for the themes, especially in the contributions of supply chain approach to organizational efficiency and effectiveness, and as well as the significance of the role of supply chain management among private, public, and nonprofit organizations. I already talked about how the changes in the trends that began to emerge in the 90s have pretty much affected those themes. And so as you read this week, you might also do some Google searches, something that I don't really require for an assignment, but as you study, I want you to go in and go on a Google search and start looking for news stories that have something to do with these chapter topics. I do that a lot myself as I prepare for your lectures, and I find different things that I want to share with you. You will find some timely articles. There's a lot of great information out there that needs to be discovered. And so if you find that and want to share that with me, that's awesome. If you want to post something to the whole class, maybe through just the email, or I may even set up just a blog spot where we can just go in. We have a blog function on Blackboard where we can go in and post things. So maybe we will do that. I will let you know if I do set up something like that. But if you just want to share something with me that you just think is interesting, that would add to the conversation, well, then by all means share that with us. And you can do that on discussion forum as long as it goes along with that week's topic, okay? So I hope that you enjoy reading through this book. Again, chapter 1, kind of a retracing of what we talked about in the first course, but it is going to get you ready for the remaining topics in this chapter. If you have any other questions, you know how to contact me through campus email or the Blackboard mail tab here in the course, or you can call me 870-722-8261. Again, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I hope you enjoy studying this week's topics.